Bonjour à tous et toutes, merci de vous joindre aujourd'hui à nous pour notre nouvelle session d'introduction Tental, la dernière innovation en matière de murs rideaux en aluminium. Pour ceux et celles qui ne me connaissent pas encore, je m'appelle Sébastien Labillois et je suis architecte. J'ai rejoint le groupe Hydro Building System en 2020 et je suis aujourd'hui Project Manager pour les projets francophones en Belgique. Nous avons la chance aujourd'hui d'être entourés de 3 experts de renommée internationale, au travers desquels nous allons découvrir les nouvelles tendances des façades et des solutions en menuiserie aluminium. Nous accueillons d'abord Xavier Ferrez, qui a fait son doctorat en architecture à l'Université Polytechnique de Catalogne et qui a collaboré à la conception et la construction de 180 projets en Europe, en Afrique et en Amérique du Sud. Mathieu Meur ensuite, qui lui a obtenu son Master of Engineering et a travaillé sur plus de 300 projets concernant les enveloppes des bâtiments. Per Olsson enfin, qui travaille en tant que responsable de développement durable pour Link Architecture, une des principales agences d'architecture de Scandinavie. Nous bénéficierons également des connaissances de notre collègue, Johan de Breukere, que certains d'entre vous connaissent peut-être déjà. Johan est le Product Marketing Manager Benelux et nous donne aujourd'hui une introduction dont la façon de Tental est capable d'atteindre aujourd'hui vos objectifs de durabilité, améliore vos techniques de conception et vous offre une plus grande flexibilité sur les projets qui ont aujourd'hui un impact sur l'environnement qui nous entoure. J'espère que vous apprécierez la session d'introduction d'aujourd'hui et vous remercie encore une fois d'avoir pris le temps, malgré votre emploi du temps chargé, de nous rejoindre aujourd'hui.
Hello, my name is Xavi Ferrés. I'm an architect and CEO of Ferrés Arquitectos y Consultores, a company based in Barcelona. And we have more than 35 years of experience in facade development and technical facade around the world. First of all, I would like to introduce myself with a simple sentence. Yes, I'm an architect. But an architect with a special profile because my team and me, we have developed more than 180 buildings for the last 30 years, making credible the ideas from the others, sharing them by teaching in different universities and especially drawing. We have a small and very dynamic office based in Barcelona, from where we offer facade consultancy for the best architects around the world, especially with even Ritzker Prize. Usually, architects imagine the result and the engineers create the process, or explaining it in another way, architects think what and engineers know how. So we, as facade consultants, move in an equidistant position between both, and our projects are developed with a simple philosophy. Technique and form are the same. Every day, more and more architecture studios focus their work on level of definition of the facade and the technical aspect and the conceptual and functional development, leaving the detailing and the specific topics and specific elements of the facade are delegated to the technical and specialists from the industry. So, the most common way to face the problem of the technology is to claim the support of brands that help us to develop the most ambitious projects. Our role as consultant, in addition to above, is to think and advise from the strategic development. The present leads us to consider energy as one of the engines of evolution, and this has been the case for decades. However, this contrasts with the need to work with large formats and glazed surfaces that put so-called window-wall ratio increases, which is the energy performance of the facade, is in contradiction with the dimension of the transparent areas of the buildings. On the other hand, this need to increase the sizes requires larger panel dimensions, engineered for bigger and heavier glass panels by means an innovative connection and reinforced glazing support. The last year, we started with jumbo glass was 3.2 by 6.2. Actually, we have, with different suppliers, glasses from 18 meters height by 3.4. So obviously we can use these sizes of glass. The trend of the buildings around the world is to increase the glass surface, but balancing with the window-wall ratio, because we need to balance the comfort of the users contacting directly with across the glass the landscape, the sea, the rest of the city, in order to respect the rules and regulations in terms of energy savings. The only way that I can explain my experience, my thought, my feeling about the technical decision, the technical elements, is drawing. My brain is connected with my hand directly. When we are creating, we have to pass from the concept and schematic design development, and the construction documents, trying to be proactive with the architects, normally or usually our clients, in order to achieve the maximal fidelity of original idea. For example, building is under construction in Barcelona, named Diagonal Zero, with a multi-story building. I think it's 27 levels with a special balcony. This is the original slab because it's a huge modification of the building. This is the slab. This is the beam that we have to support. The level of interior floor. This is exterior floor, and we have a shape like this. This is a balcony, this is a terrace. The building is something like this. It's more or less 110 meters, and all these balconies are here. And here we have, in the lateral facade, we have a typical curtain wall. It's a profile typical with spandrel and glass and windows, etc. The pass from here to here is very important to understand what happened. What is the slab? What is the structure? What is the weather line? In this case, with a sliding corridor, a sliding window, a huge, maybe 250 meter height, and this is a part, and we'd like to show this in color, but I think that it's clear in order to understand what happened when we have to develop from the concept to the detail. The second case that would like to share with you is a commercial and residential building in Ibiza, named Isla Blanca. The author is l'agence Moiti Rivière de Paris. The project is led by Alain Moiti, and the local partner is Josep Ferrer Llaneras. The main concept is a shadow device named voilette in French. It's an element qui vole. So the building is double like this, maybe 80 meters of length from here to here. To use this kind of material like a hat that produces the shadow under the face of a woman on the beach. And this element is something like this. You have there are different molds, because this is the main structure of the building, and here is hanged a huge element like this that supports these curves. So we have the structural element, this is a cantilever, more than 200.5.4, and this is the voilette in ultra-high performance concrete that allows it works perfectly like a shadow device. So we have the vegetal elements here, and we have the windows, openables, etc. So we have from here, we have as well another element here that is the characteristic of this building. The third case study is a multi-story hotel in L'Hospitalet, near Barcelona, in the Plaza Europa zone. It's a huge complex with a lot of buildings, hotels, office buildings, etc. This case is a project of Alonso y Balaguer. It's the most common and typical curtain wall facade. The building is a parallelogram like this, with a typical zone with machines and the HVC equipment, etc. And the rest of the facade is a grid, absolutely regular, with the profiles that I will explain, because it's, in terms of technology, is very simple, but the effect is really very interesting. So we have these two profiles, and they are clipped in the main mullion of the facade, and that's it. So we have here, we have the Toyoito building, the Nouvelle building, RCR here as well, Moneo, and well, it is a very interesting complex that I invite you to visit, because if you are an architect passionate, I think that could be a good option to spend one day in order to know directly all this kind of different architecture. As conclusion, I would like to share with you 5 thoughts as a summary. First of all, evolution that improves considering aspects from different points of view, like industry, architects, investors, owners, and consultants like us. Second, the extreme conditions of use are solved anticipating the problems and building samples and performance and visual mock-up that are tested by the owners in terms to approve the final solution in order to check the transparency, the vibration, all the aspects that we have to control by using prototypes and mock-up in real size. Third, we have to look for collaboration for international brands that belong to a big and well-known group. Is the best option to guarantee a long experience of success. The fourth topic that I think that it's important to sum up this small explanation is involve the clients and users in the project. Planning, commissioning, exploitation, maintenance, live and recycling building as way of working, because we have to change our attitude about the design and use of the buildings. And finally, we have to work from a global perspective, make it essential to combine the most diverse languages, cultures, rules and regulations, economic and social criteria with the most attractive architectural proposals. And for us, it's a privilege to be able to create a space for the better future. Thank you so much for the opportunity that I have to share my thought and my opinion. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Mathieu Meur and I'm the director of DP Facade. I'm a facade consultant by training. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've worked on projects, probably around 500 projects on 6 continents. This is what really makes life as a facade consultant very, very interesting and very challenging at the same time, working across different geographies, different cultures. Working as a facade consultant can prove slightly tricky at times. We have to be a bit of a schizophrenic or slightly schizophrenic at times. Working with architects, we need to think like an architect. We think of the aesthetics of the building. We need to think how beautiful it's going to be. And we need to make or bring to life, rather, the vision of the architect and the developer. We also need to think as an engineer because it needs to hold itself up, it needs to be structurally sound, it needs to be thermally efficient. There's a whole bunch of engineering considerations that go into creating the perfect facade. We also then need to think like the fabricator, the person who's actually going to implement this. It needs to be something that can be fabricated easily, that can be installed easily, that can be transported. No, you really need to think or wear different hats and think like a bunch of different people. This is why the teams of facade consultants that work with me come from different backgrounds, they come from different training. Some are architects, some are engineers, some are specialists in construction. There's really different profiles that need to come together to make it really happen. So far, over the past 20-odd years, I've worked on buildings that were low-rise but highly, highly complicated mega projects like the Dubai Mall or Resorts World at Sentosa and Universal Studios. Low-rise doesn't mean easy. It's generally actually more complicated because you work with multiple systems, multiple materials, from glass to aluminum to steel, which are very classic facade materials. But then you also throw in stone, GRC, GRP, ceramics, and really a plethora of other materials and other systems that complicate matters beyond recognition. Working on high-rise, the challenges can be quite different because the facade is more repetitive. You repeat it on multiple floors, but it doesn't mean that it's easy either. Other considerations come into play, like building movement, tolerances over the super high-rise buildings can be quite challenging to take into account in our designs. Different projects, different locations, different considerations come into play, whether it's seismic activity, whether it's snow loading in temperate countries, whether it's extreme heats. This is really one aspect I wanted to touch on briefly now, which is what's happening with climate change. With climate change, what we're having now is more extreme weather, greater winds, greater temperature fluctuations, a whole bunch of additional considerations that make designing facades much more complicated and that require much greater care from the facade consultant who's handling the facade. On top of that, to make matters worse in a way, or maybe to make matters more interesting, that's how I'd like to think about it, architects are making or designing facades that are increasingly complex. It's almost like a competition, who's going to get the ideas that outweigh or outdo the predecessor, so to speak. And we get complex geometries, we get various aspects in the design of facades that really challenge us to bring our best when we work on this project. To do this, what we do is we've had to develop or acquire a bunch of new tools that we did not traditionally use. When I started as a young engineer, a young facade engineer, I used to do everything by hand, whether it's the sketches, whether it's the calculations, whether it's everything was done by hand. And today we are using technologies such as BIM, such as parametric design, using dedicated engineering software. We make use of 3D rapid prototyping to test ideas, to see, does it even make sense? Is it buildable? We've even developed tools that are not on the market, so something we call IVMU, which is an interactive visual mock-up, which allows the designers, so the engineers, the architects, the owners, the building developers, to use virtual reality goggles to visualize in real time what their buildings is going to look like, what their facades are going to look like, and to make changes in real time. And this is really a fantastic tool that we've developed over the past couple of years, and that really changes our approach to designing facades on these, especially on these complicated buildings with multiple materials, complex geometries. But ultimately, I'd like to bring it back down to the human level. Tools are tools, and it's all down to those that use it. And this is really where experience, dedication really make a difference in the design of facades and a successful outcome to projects. When it comes to sustainability, one of the key challenges that we are faced as building designers is that of reducing the carbon footprints of buildings that we design. It is notorious that buildings and construction in general contribute to a very large proportion of the overall carbon footprint in the world. There are several levels that as designers we can work on to have a positive impact on this. The first one is during the design phase itself, because a lot of the materials that we use in construction, be it concrete, be it aluminum, be it glass, a whole lot of these materials have a very strong impact on the carbon footprint of the building. They require a whole lot of energy in particular to fabricate these elements. How we can impact that, there are some very simple measures that you can do. One is to adopt or use as much recycled content in the building facades as possible. And as strange as it may seem to the layman, actually it is something that is increasingly happening and without any deleterious effects on the facade itself. Aluminum in particular, when it is recycled, it is infinitely recycled. It's a beautiful material from that point of view. The amount of energy required to create aluminum elements from recycled aluminum versus raw materials, it's reduced by 95%. So it's a really massive impact that we can have. The same goes with glass, for instance. By recycling glass, we can achieve a positive impact by reducing the fusion temperature, the melting temperature of glass, which in turn reduces the amount of energy required to create new raw glass, to create new facades again. And the same can be done with other materials as well. Steel in particular is also very easily recyclable. Other than that, we have new old materials that go into facades. For instance, timber. Timber has been used in construction for, centuries or millennia, in fact. It is something that sort of disappeared in the modern age of facade construction, but is making a very strong comeback. While it has very good advantages, it's a carbon sink in particular, so it absorbs the carbon and stores it inside itself. It has certain disadvantages at the same time, and it can be then combined with minimal amount of aluminum, for instance, to create modern facade with a very traditional look. And on top of that, wood is also excellent in terms of thermal insulations. Timber, I feel, is an interesting product that we are more commonly looking into using, and it is also obviously a renewable resource. The second part is obviously in the operation of the building, so looking at thermal performance of the facade and making sure that the energy consumption of the building is reduced as much as possible by making, in particular, the facade as efficient as we can when we design it. The third aspect is essentially the end-of-life performance of the facade. How easily is it recyclable? How can we either reuse or recycle the elements of the facade to either create a new facade or to turn it into something else. These are three of the simple ways that we can reduce the carbon footprints of the buildings that we're designing today. With this, I'd like to thank you very much, and I'll hand you over to Per Olsson for the next segment. Thank you very much.
My name is Per Olsson. I work as head of sustainability at the architectural firm Link Architecture. My main work is working with strategic sustainability in relation to our architectural services and our collaboration with our clients, developing our focus in relation to this. That is defining and developing our focus in relation to the sustainability aspects that deliver the most positive impact and value for our clients, and also how we can design to deliver on those aspects. We are a Scandinavian architectural business. We have some 500 employees. We have offices in all over Sweden, Norway and Denmark, and we work with sustainability as a central part of our business offer to our clients. The 6 focus areas are carbon emission. We also talk about climate smart architecture. The next one is circular economy or circular architecture. And then we work focused with biodiversity. On the social sustainability side, we work with safe environments, health and well-being, and then placemaking. So if we start with climate smart architecture or carbon emission as focus, we work very much on designing buildings with a low carbon emission or a carbon footprint. And that is both from operations when it comes to energy efficiency, but also when it comes to embodied carbon, which means the carbon that is emitted when producing the materials that goes into a building. If we then talk about circular economy and circular architecture, it's very much about designing resource efficient, securing that we don't use resources unnecessarily, but also about taking care of the buildings that are already built, so transforming or renovating buildings before we start looking for producing new buildings. It's also about reuse and recycle of materials, and also designing for circularity, preparing our buildings for a future that is more circular than it is today. And then we can talk a little bit about biodiversity. We know that the building environment and producing materials and constructing the buildings have a great negative impact on biodiversity. So when working with the built environment, it's really important to look at biodiversity and see how we, when we construct our buildings, can choose materials that have a low impact on biodiversity, and also work with biodiversity when we create the environments, the built environments within the cities. If we then talk a little bit about the social sustainability that we work with, one of the areas are safe environments. We know that creating safety within, for example, residential areas, schools, housing, etc., creates people that feel safe and can take in, for example, in schools, can take in their education better. They come to school. I mean, not being safe at school can make students not come to school. So safety is a very important part of our contribution to social sustainability. And then we can talk a little about the health and well-being. That is important part if you work with offices, hospitals, schools, also residential areas. If you can support a living that is healthy and supports well-being, then you can solve or contribute positive to some societal challenges. We know stress is a area in at least the Western world that is problematic. We know that the different heart diseases and so on. And then the last one is about placemaking, and that is both about safe environment but also about interesting environment, places where you want to stay, places where diverse people can come and meet, and you can feel the inclusiveness because you want to stay there, you want to meet other people. When it comes to the architect's role in relation to sustainability and sustainable development, we play an important role because we usually get in pretty early in the processes and the project development. And thereby we can be part of setting a vision that fully integrates sustainability so that it can be a base for decision made during the design and also during the construction phase. And then we also play a very important role when it comes to the actual design. So through the design we can work with, for example, indoor environment when it comes to designing so that daylight comes into the building, that you have a good view of the scenery, and also working with designing so that we minimize the negative impact of the built environment in relation to resource usage or carbon emission and stuff like that. And then when we come to looking at choices that we make, for example in relation to materials, we have a great possibility to influence the final positive impact in relation to sustainability by choosing materials that we know can lower, for example, the carbon emission, the carbon footprint of the building, or adding to some qualities in relation to indoor environment. Well, if we talk about materials, we know that the construction industry and producing materials have a great negative impact on the environment. It's everything from polluting the air and the water. It's about using resources, virgin resources, that is rare or scarce or limited. So we have to make sure that we don't use them too much, because then we'll run out of them. It's also about, we know, for example, that 80% of all drinking water goes into producing different materials. We know that 80% of the loss of biodiversity is coming from producing materials, foods, etc. So it's a very important part when choosing materials that we look upon materials not only from a cost perspective and a quality perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective, and always try to look and find the materials that gives us the most bang for the buck, the most positive impact in relation to the investment that we do. When we talk about aluminum, that is a very good material, because you can recycle it over and over again without it losing its qualities and so on. And it's also good because there is a lower carbon footprint when you work with recycled aluminum than with virgin aluminum. So it makes sense to work with aluminum and recycle it and so on. We know that the construction industry is emitting some 40% of all carbon emissions. And we also know that the built environment has a big impact on water and biodiversity. And all this together makes it really important to work holistically in relation to sustainable development. And talking about carbon emission, it's really important that we not only look at the operation, because if we look at carbon emissions, we have 1/3 that comes from embodied carbon and 2/3 that comes from operation. But we also know that carbon emission from embodied carbon is carbon that is emitted day one. And we're quite in a hurry to turn the trend in relation to carbon emissions. So therefore, we have to have some 40% lower carbon emission in relation to embodied carbon at 2030 to be able to reach the 1.5 degree target that is defined by the Paris Agreement. So a building that is not addressing embodied carbon, I would say, is not a sustainable building at the moment. Then it comes very natural that the one that has the lowest carbon emission is the best one to choose from a sustainability perspective. So then you can compare one with another and go for the one that has the lowest carbon footprint. You should always start with taking care of the negative footprint of your own production, because that one you can be 100% sure of makes a difference. When choosing to compensate, you will never know if that forest that you have planted as a compensation will be there in 20 or 30 or 40 years. Is there a trade-off between climate-friendly design and aesthetics? No, I would say it's not, especially if you can work with circularity. There is actually good possibilities to develop that further and create very unique aesthetics. So no, I would say there is not. To add on that, I would say that at the moment when we are in a situation of transferring from one type of sustainability agenda to another, there can be limitations, but moving forward, sustainability will be the new black, and then that will not have a negative impact on aesthetics, I would say.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Johan de Breukere, je suis le Product Marketing Manager SAPA. Lors du développement de Tental, nous nous sommes concentrés sur 4 piliers principaux. Innovation, conception, confort et durabilité. Commençons par regarder le numéro 1, l'innovation. Ainsi, dans le cadre du développement de la façade Tental, nous avons travaillé sur un certain nombre de nouvelles innovations pour nos clients et les utilisateurs finaux. Nous avons créé une solution pour des connexions sèches entre les profilés en aluminium. Pour cela, nous avons une solution brevetée qui nous permet de créer un raccord sec entre les profilés en alu. Cela signifie pas de collage, pas de kit et donc pas d'emballage et pas de déchets. Cette connexion sèche est utilisée en atelier et n'est donc pas soumise aux intempéries. Nous avons une solution pour réaliser des raccords secs entre les joints de vitrage intérieur. Encore une fois, pas de colle, pas de kit, pas d'emballage et pas de déchets. Et ces joints peuvent également aider à absorber de plus grandes tolérances d'épaisseur de remplissage que nous connaissons avec les vitrages multicouches, tels que les stratifiés acoustiques ou de sécurité et bien sûr le triple vitrage. Pour le serrage des vitrages, nous avons développé une solution efficace thermiquement. Ici, nous empêchons le froid d'être aspiré de l'extérieur à travers les vitrages, ce qui se traduit par d'excellentes valeurs U. Nous avons créé un profil de refroidissement résistant au feu qui peut être inséré dans l'alu et qui, en cas d'incendie, ralentit la fusion des profilés principaux, rendant la façade stable pendant longtemps, jusqu'à 60 minutes. Nous avons créé la possibilité d'intégrer des copies de charges lourdes dans la connexion entre les traverses et les montants, pouvant porter jusqu'à 850 kg en combinaison avec des supports de vitrage renforcés. Si nous regardons ensuite le numéro 2, design. La façade Tental est disponible dans un certain nombre d'options esthétiques différentes. Nous avons une gamme de base avec des coiffes de finition où le profil de recouvrement est situé à la fois verticalement et horizontalement. Nous avons des lignes horizontales où nous minimisons le joint sur la ligne verticale et en utilisant les possibilités étendues dans les coiffes, nous soulignons l'horizontalité de la façade. Nous avons également des lignes verticales qui accentuent la ligne verticale sur la façade. Nous avons une coiffe plate qui peut être utilisée sur les traverses et montants. Nous avons un système traditionnel avec un collage structurel en silicone Et nous avons également un système avec des parts closes pour un effet de bord épuré de l'extérieur. La gamme de base des coiffes de protection est disponible dans un certain nombre de conceptions et de tailles différentes. Tous les profilés peuvent être laqués, anodisés ou finis avec un effet bois. Le produit peut être joint pour créer différentes géométries, facettes, angles et applications de vitrage incliné. Et le produit est applicable aux structures en bois et en acier. Le troisième pilier est le confort. En tant qu'être humain, nous passons la plupart de notre vie à l'intérieur. Nous voulions donc nous assurer que nous fournissons un haut niveau de confort physique et mental aux résidents derrière la façade. La façade Tental est conçue pour accueillir de très grandes baies vitrées permettant une pénétration de lumière naturelle dans le bâtiment plus importante. Le produit a été rigoureusement testé contre les intempéries, conformément aux normes internationales pour garantir d'excellentes performances et une excellente étanchéité. En plus des influences météorologiques, nous proposons également des solutions qui garantissent la résistance au feu et à l'effraction. La façade Tental atteindra d'excellentes performances thermiques et sera certifiée par le Passive House Institute. Il sera également testé acoustiquement pour la transmission du son à travers la façade d'étage à étage et de pièce à pièce. La façade Tental comprendra un certain nombre d'options de montage externe différentes qui permettent une intégration transparente de la protection solaire et sera entièrement compatible avec la nouvelle génération de fenêtres, de portes et de coulissants de la marque SAPA. Le quatrième pilier important est la durabilité, la circularité. Ainsi, lors du développement de Tental, nous nous sommes concentrés non seulement sur le présent, mais aussi sur l'avenir. Dans le développement du produit, nous nous sommes concentrés sur la production, l'assemblage, l'installation pour nous assurer qu'il est pratique, simple et efficace pour notre client, et nous nous sommes également concentrés sur le démontage lorsque le produit est à la fin de son cycle de vie. Cela revient au principe de ne pas utiliser d'adhésif, de mastic, car cela signifie que les pièces de la façade, l'aluminium, les connexions, les coupures thermiques peuvent être facilement séparées afin que toutes les pièces puissent être recyclées de manière simple. La façade Tental est extrudée avec de l'aluminium hydro Circal 75R, consistant de recyclage d'au moins 75% d'aluminium usagé. L'impact de cela sur la façade est important car l'aluminium, en fonction de l'ouverture de la fenêtre de la façade, peut représenter jusqu'à 90% du volume de matériaux. Cela signifie donc que l'énergie nécessaire à la production de la façade Tental aura l'empreinte CO2 la plus faible du marché et sera confirmée par une déclaration environnementale du produit ou EPD. En plus de l'aluminium, nous avons été responsables de la sélection d'autres matériaux utilisés dans la façade, tels que les coupures thermiques en XPET recyclées provenant de bouteilles de boissons en plastique. La façade Tental est certifiée Cradle to Cradle. Le programme de certification Cradle to Cradle est une référence mondialement reconnue non seulement pour le produit, mais aussi pour la durabilité. L'évaluation de la façade Tental est en cours avec notre attente d'obtenir une certification argent. En suivant ces 4 piliers, nous avons pu créer une façade responsable, un produit utilisant les processus de carbone les plus bas possibles, avec des innovations qui offrent à la fois efficacité et économie pour notre client, garantissant que les réductions de carbone sont atteintes tout au long de la durée de vie du bâtiment grâce à des valeurs U plus faibles et enfin, quand il est temps pour la façade ou le bâtiment à être remplacé, les matériaux utilisés de la façade Tental peuvent commencer une toute nouvelle vie. La façade Tental contribue non seulement à une architecture plus verte, mais élève la norme de l'architecture durable à un tout autre niveau.
Merci encore d'avoir participé à notre session d'information Tental, notre nouveau système de mur rideau qui vous permettra, j'en suis sûr, de remporter de nombreuses affaires et d'exécuter de magnifiques projets. Tental est peut-être déjà une source d'inspiration pour nombreux d'entre vous. Toutes les informations préalables sont disponibles sur notre site web www.sapa-chassis.be. Si vous souhaitez travailler avec nous sur un nouveau projet, je vous invite à nous envoyer un email à info.hbs.be@hydro.com ou encore info.hbs.lu@hydro.com. Des séances d'information plus détaillées et des sessions de formation seront bientôt disponibles dans les prochains mois. Nous communiquerons vers vous en temps utile. Vous pouvez également nous tenir au courant des dernières innovations en matière de solutions durables et en termes de construction de façades en aluminium en nous suivant sur LinkedIn. Nous sommes très heureux d'avoir pu communiquer avec vous aujourd'hui, même si c'est à distance et non en présentiel. Nous nous réjouissons de vous revoir bientôt et d'interagir avec vous sous peu pour de nouveaux projets. À très bientôt.